All right, thanks everyone for joining us as we talk about investing in climate action. I'm Jamie Helmer, I'm the Director of Fuel Efficiency with Norfolk Southern. And joining me today, we have Hicks Winter. And Hicks is the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Advocacy with Dow. And Hiba Mooney. And Hiba's joined us from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And she heads up the climate and environmental strategy. So let's hear more about what those titles mean. So Hicks, tell us a little bit about your role and what that means within your company.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thanks for having us. And on behalf of Dow, I certainly wanted to thank the Chamber, who's been a long-term partner of ours. Dow turned 125 years old this year, and for a big chunk of that time, we've been partners with the Chamber, both nationally, internationally, and through their state federation. So really just kudos to you all for putting this on, and hopefully you're having a wonderful experience here in D.C. So yes, I'm part of our Government Affairs Advocacy team here in D.C. I spend a decent chunk of my time around energy and climate issues. So for Dow, we're on this third decade of sustainability journeys. We've got some top-line targets that I guess I'll run through real quick so we can get into the conversation. One that we call protecting the climate. So that actually has to do with our absolute emissions reductions. So it's about 5 million tons by 2030, which is a 15% reduction from our 2020 emissions profile. And the thing about that is the 2020 profile was a 15% reduction from our 2005 numbers. So all while growing our business at about 30% growth. So when we talk about decarbonizing and grow, factor in the growth there. Nobody wants to stay status quo here. We're all talking about growing while decarbonizing. The other top line target I want to share with you all is something we call transforming the waste, which is a commitment by Dow to transform about 3 million tons of plastics back into the economy by 2030. And our third and final big top line bucket is what we call closing the loop. So for our packaging space, that's making sure that by 2035, 100% of our packaging materials are recyclable and or reusable back in the economy. So that's me and sort of a top line of what Dow is doing on our sustainability journey currently.
That's great. What a great story and a great future. Hiba, how about you?
Sure. So at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, we're a global edge-to-cloud company. So that means that we are helping our customers harness their data, store their data, and manage their data wherever they are in the world. So compute, high-performance compute, networking, storage devices, we manufacture and sell them across the globe. And so for us, decarbonization has been at the root of what we've done for, many years now, since we were HP Co. We became Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in 2015, and we did not shy away from that leadership in sustainability. We set our first round of science-based emissions reduction targets with the Science-Based Target Initiative back in 2016, and just this summer, we accelerated our commitment to be a net zero enterprise by 2040. So we accelerated it 10 years from 2050. And it was really important for us to do that to be competitive on the market. And our targets, ambitious as they are, by 2030, we'll have a 70% reduction in our scope 1 and scope 2, so those scopes that are within our control, and 42% within our scope 3. But by 2040, we're looking at a full 90% reduction across all scopes. So that's going to make, that's a business imperative to us to deal with decarbonization, but it is also going to take an entire business transformation to get to that 90% by 2040.
Absolutely, and such companies with legacies and so much to overcome with goals like that. So let's ground ourselves in what's going on in the current world. How do things like weather events or supply chain issues figure into all of this? Hiba, do you want to talk?
Yeah, so we're no stranger to climate-related events affecting our business. Back in 2017, Hurricane Harvey that sat on top of Texas dropped about 3 feet of rain on one of our largest global data centers. And so where we were assembling our servers and our storage devices, we had employees displaced, our products displaced. We moved our entire facility, it's about a 134-acre facility, had to move. And so we essentially, determined in that moment that we were going to locate ourselves in regions that were not being impacted by extreme weather. And where we could, we would help the communities in which extreme weather was a big factor. And so this was displacing our employees. You know, this was moving remote before moving remote was even considered an option. And so building that entire infrastructure around a weather-related event and climate change was kind of a new thing for us. But since then, you know, we've seen shipment delays within our logistics organization based on hurricanes and different weather events. So we acted on that. You know, we released our risks and our climate-related risks, our financial risks publicly through the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure reporting that we did in 2018. And we're responding within our own business continuity programs. So climate change is considered a risk within the development and management of our own business continuity. And then we evaluated with our suppliers across the globe as well, understanding what they are doing to respond to the greatest impacts of climate change and how that's going to affect our business.
That's amazing. It sounds like you're thinking in terms of resiliency throughout your network, your supply chain. Great. Hicks, what about on your side?
Gosh, she captured it so well. You know, to build on that, you're right. I mean, extreme weather events seem to be targeting most folks these days. And for the industrial base that, for example, is in the Gulf Coast, I mean, it's not like you're going to up and move that anytime soon, right? And so when dealing with extreme weather events, from hurricanes to freezes to floods, you know, I think part of it's about adaptation. You know, how are you going to stay there? How does the infrastructure look? How do you harden that? But Hippo brought up a good point about supply chains, and we've gotten a lot of attention on that through COVID, right? And it's how do you make sure your supply chains are ready, active, mobile, and really accountable to move services and goods around in a time where extreme weather is almost to be expected. And so certainly that is a big concern of Dow, something we work on constantly, you know, and so it's part of, I think, the world moving forward, at least for us, especially in the industrial corridor along the Gulf Coast.
That's great. So both of you have mentioned the risk associated with the modern world, with the supply chains disruptions, with the weather events. But let's turn it around and talk about the opportunities, and tell me what opportunities you see in terms of the sustainability efforts.
So I talked a little bit about, you know, giving us a competitive advantage on the market. This is something that our customers are really keyed in on. What are our decarbonization plans for the future, and how are we going to help our customers get there, whether it's through the products that we provide them or in the solutions that we have for them. And so we're looking at this from a customer-centric standpoint. We see an opportunity to be a leader in the market, to bring solutions to the market. We see it as an opportunity to bring partners along with us. So for us, you know, a lot of the successes that we've had in the decarbonization space, especially with our suppliers, has been through these partnerships with our tech sector peers and beyond, through the industry groups that we work with as well. So, you know, there's this incredible groundswell of not only companies, but the employees within those companies really caring about the environment in which they're working in which they're living in. And so, you know, I just see that as an opportunity going forward to harness that power of the collective and move forward together. I think it was said in a panel just before this as well. It's not a journey that we are on alone. It's not a solitary journey. It's something that you know, HPE can't achieve by itself. So it's really important for us to grow those partnerships.
But it sounds like you're leading your partners and they're encouraging you to be a leader, and that's a mutual path forward?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of give and take. You know, we're trying to partner with the leaders and learn from them. You know, we don't do everything perfectly, certainly not today. And so wherever we can harness those solutions and some of those partnerships and see where we can learn from each other, there's always an opportunity there.
That's wonderful. How about the opportunities on your side, Hicks?
Yeah, I think the risk is not recognizing that we're on a pathway towards a lower carbon economy, right? And for those folks who have their heads in the sand and are waiting on, you know, maybe government intervention or to be last actors, you're going to be left behind. I think it's important and a competitive advantage to move early. This is based on customer demands, our employee colleagues, suppliers, shareholders, so not based on some government mandate that we're taking action early. And I think, hopefully that resonates for the crowd here while you're in DC. Usually policy is a lagging indicator, and I think there's an opportunity for businesses who are willing and committed to being early actors in their transformation to provide those products and solutions that accelerate our path towards decarbonization. And I think for Dow, those things are chemistry-created solutions, such as lightweighting cars, such as electric batteries, such as advanced tech solar arrays, better food packaging, and again, all these things that help us along this pathway towards what's coming is a lower carbon economy. And I think the sooner folks recognize that and act on it, the better.
And we mentioned partnerships. What advice would you have for our audience members about these opportunities, about trying to find their own partners? Do you want to go first, Hicks?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, and I wanted to share this with the group. So I mentioned we're on the third decade of our sustainability journey over here at Dow, and one thing that we've had along this pathway is an external group of independent advisors. We call it our SEEK, so it stands for Sustainability Environment Advisory Council. And so it's folks from the private, public sector, academia, who are out there challenging us to weave sustainability into our business planning. It's a real gut check on whether or not we're taking the right steps at a pace where we should be taking them. So, for those of you who are able to get a 360 feedback on what you're doing, how well you're doing it, I mean, it's a real nice gut check to have an external group look at you and say, hey, you're moving in this direction, you should be moving in that. The pace of your movement should be this as opposed to that. And it's been one of those things that, believe it or not, has really helped us accelerate our sustainability goals. So that's what I wanted to share with the group as far as external partnership opportunities.
That's great. Heba, any advice for the audience?
I think those external partnerships are so key. We work through the Responsible Business Alliance to kind of, connect with our suppliers at scale in a big way because other companies are doing the same. We work through the Clean Energy Buyers Association to influence policy and really make those partnerships internationally where we don't necessarily have the ability to make multiple partnerships, so we rely on an organization. And then for us, even connecting with our peers and in some cases our competitors, some of them are in the room today, and really working on, this is, we're all trying to work towards the same goal. For us, it's net zero. And we talk about this race to zero, but it's not a race that any one person should be winning. It's a finish line that we all need to cross together, essentially. And so it's not a competitive space in that collaboration for influencing our suppliers. It is when you come to working with customers and you're trying to sell your product and show that your product is the most efficient product on the market. But I think, we really hone in on those opportunities to collaborate with our direct peers. And so it's, I think sometimes it's really hard to take that first step to put your neck out there and say, hey, we're having this challenge and we really want to connect with somebody who potentially is doing much better than us. I think you'll find that a lot of companies are facing the same challenges within calculating their Scope 3 emissions. We're all kind of focused around that. It's easy to say we understand our operations, we know where we need to reduce in our operations, but we don't know what we need to do within that not even sliver, a chunk of emissions that's outside of the boundary of our control. So I think take that initial step, and don't be afraid to air your challenges and solve them together.
So you do have such aggressive targets, with net zero and backing that up even more. So tell me about HPE as an organization and the path for decarbonization and how you're partnering and being an enabler with everyone else, especially on the Scope 3 side, where you're dependent on helping them help themselves. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so focusing on the Scope 3 side, which is going to be our biggest challenge to reduce by 2040, we have 66% of our emissions is driven by the use of our products and solutions. So completely outside the boundary of our control. And then another approximately 25% is driven through our supply chain manufacturing. So that cradle to gate, the extraction of the materials to our customer's door. And so it really is, again, I'm gonna keep using this word and you're gonna hate it, but partnerships with our suppliers, with our customers. One, to harness the data that they're collecting, and two, to really encourage them to start collecting that data. You know, on the supplier side, our suppliers are across the spectrum. You know, we have very mature suppliers who are large companies who have set net zero targets, who are aligned with us. We have smaller suppliers that haven't set those net zero targets. They haven't set targets at all at this point. And so since 2016, we've had an engagement target with our suppliers, 80% of our suppliers to set science-based targets, and this is focused on our manufacturing suppliers, by 2030. So they have to be science-based targets that they set, and they need to progress to them by 2030, which feeds our absolute reduction target as well. And so we offer capability building, we offer one-on-one engagements, we offer our partners that we work with to inform us, you know, to do our gut checks and our verification. We offer those to our suppliers as well, and we're building software platforms that allow our suppliers to look at their information and their emissions and model their own science-based targets. So we're really trying to work within our own supply chain, and then on the customer side, it's really giving our customers more information when we deliver a solution on how that product is used, whether it's at their location or at a colo facility. And for them to understand, you know, how they can best use the product. So whether they're operating it at peak demand or not. And so, you know, we're trying to encourage and influence our customers to move to renewable energy, which means that they're running our products on renewable energy. And then our own target for 100% renewable energy by 2030. So we've got a lot of things that we're driving in the next 10 to 20 years that we have to keep track of. But it really comes down to meeting everyone where they are on their journey towards maturity and decarbonization, and then taking them along with us.
Now, you said something very casually, and I don't want to skip by it before we turn to manufacturing, but you mentioned data and how important the data is. Have you had to create new data systems? Have you asked your suppliers or these partners to provide data? Tell me about the data side of things.
So I think yes and yes. So we developed a software platform actually with our peers and with a company called Aptera for our suppliers' manufacturing emissions. And essentially, we collect all of our suppliers' data through CDP, and then we model, based on all of their emissions and their historic emissions, we model a science-based target for them. And so really, they don't have to do any work. They have to go into the platform and see what their target's gonna look like. What they need to do is then take it to their leadership and say, hey, we need to set a target. Our customers are asking for this. And so it's really developing, again, that two-way street. We also allow our suppliers to see how they're performing against our requirements and then against their peers. So adding a little bit of that competitive edge, competitive advantage within the actual data that we're providing to them. So again, keeping it very transparent, keeping this two-way street for data, but data is really going to drive our successes here. Understanding what our baselines are, because if we keep modeling the same way, right, definition of insanity, you're doing the same thing the same way, we're never going to get to that reduction by 2040.
That's great. So now let's talk about Dow and manufacturing and all the processes that you've had to put in place for decarbonization. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, happy to do it. And for the industrial manufacturers in the room, this might be a lesson that you've heard already. I picked up on the renewable energy that Hiba mentioned, and so I'm happy to say that Dow is in, I think, the top 10, if not top 20, corporate users of renewable energy across the globe. So I think it's 900 plus megawatts where we are now. So, for all those applications that we can now provide renewable electricity for, we're doing that at every chance we get. So that's a great story to tell as well. But look, we're an energy-intensive manufacturer, right? So we take a product, heat it up a lot that has traditionally been based on fossil fuel use, so natural gas, coal, et cetera, and crack it and then put it back together as the customer specifications require. And so, along this journey, we've looked for those opportunities to gain efficiencies. A lot of that for decades has been, using some of your waste heat processes and driving it back into the plants. It's also been about fuel switching lately, and hydrogen has become a word that you hear a lot about, not only here in DC, but out in the States, certainly the manufacturing hubs. And so that's a potential fuel switching that we're looking at, which will, again, decrease our carbon emissions profile substantially. And I think for those streams of emissions that are left over after that, another buzzword these days, you guys have heard it, is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And so when we talk about capturing those streams that you can't put back in your process, or maybe there's not a yet determined place for them, we talk about developing the pipeline infrastructure across the country, to store that carbon. And I think that gets us really close to some of those net zero goals by 2050. So there's some efficiencies to be gained around the plant. There's fuel switching to lower carbon fuels. And then for the rest, there's some carbon capture and storage. And so that's sort of the story of the energy-intensive sectors, like chemicals, glass, cement, et cetera. And so we're happy to be in that journey and again, making the investments every time we can. So
now you mentioned renewables. So did you have that conversation with the utilities that said we need more renewables, or did they come to you and make an offering? How did that conversation go? A little of both?
I think it's a little of both. There's a pathway that is renewable for some industrials that have maybe enough real estate or acreage near an operation where they could potentially put their own power behind the fence. Certainly that might be some leverage talking with power companies. Look, we also produce power on our sites and sell it back into the grid. So there's a symbiotic relationship with the utilities and transmissions that exists out there. So it's important that those stakeholders are all, at the table talking.
You've given some great lessons to people about the options of how to handle various stages of their process, about possibly doing some power production. Anything else that you'd like to mention to inform others of your successes with manufacturing specifically?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to competitiveness. So this is being driven by customer demand. Some of you have seen products that have what they call an environmental product declaration, sort of like a food labeling. That's coming. So when you do business with the government, whether that be federal or state, down the line, there will be a carbon emissions profile for your product. And so up and down that value chain, you're going to have suppliers, customers asking for this. And so I think those early movers who are investing in their plants and the turnover of their assets that maybe you can't move from the Gulf Coast to the middle of the country, those people are going to be in a position to take advantage of that. And I think bring the rest of the sectors belong, but there will be a time where there will be a noticeable competitive edge to early acting.
And that takes us back to data again, to make sure people are producing the right data for their customers, that they can be competitive with that.
Right.
So you both seem to give the impression that this is not something you're out there leading on your own. It's you and your customers leading together. And do you think there's an advantage to that? We've mentioned the government. Do you think there's an advantage to industry pushing the initiatives, the targets, or do you think that there's room for government to be involved in it as well?
I would say there's a lot of room for government to be involved, and we see government getting involved. For us, we're seeing in the last just 2 years so many more policies and regulations coming out of the European Union that are going to affect us. You talked about product declarations. We have voluntary eco-labels, but we're going to have to do a digital product passport likely. That some of those rules are pending too. And so I think government is, as we have seen, open to hearing our comments. When we pulled out of the Paris Agreement in the U.S., companies stayed in. A lot of companies across the United States stayed in because they knew that it was going to be good for their business and it was a business imperative for them to stay in. And so we continue to see that. We continue to see corporations pushing, being on the leading edge of decarbonization before any governments get involved. But there's certainly room for that. I mean, we saw out of the Biden administration, there's a proposed rule where federal contractors will need to declare all of their greenhouse gas emissions. And so for some companies that is a major concern because they're not yet looking at their scope 3 and there's not necessarily guidance around scope 3 management and calculation at the base of it. And so I think, again, there's room for companies and our customers to guide government to say, why don't you create these guidelines for us? Because otherwise we're comparing apples to oranges to bananas when we're looking at somebody's scope 3 emissions, but we want to compare them and say we're comparing apples to apples, and it's just not the case. And so we kind of need a little bit of that, that government guidance, and in the absence of that, again, industry groups are developing standards. For us, the semiconductor industry is developing their own standards around science-based targets because it is a challenging industry to decarbonize in. And so they have to come together and think about how they're going to decarbonize going forward. So we see a lot of those partnerships within the companies, but I think there's a lot of room for us to influence government.
Great. How about you, Hicks?
Yeah, I think all of what Hiba just said, and I want to reinforce a couple of points. For international operators, there are jurisdictions around the globe that might be a decade or so ahead of us in terms of regulations around GHG emissions, et cetera. So, those companies who have had to work within those regimes take a page from their playbook, right? Again, I go back to the fact that we're going into a lower carbon economy, and there's no way around it, whether the government acts or not. So I would take a page from the playbook of folks who've already been there, take some lessons learned, bring that back to maybe our federal government here. And again, I think there's plenty of room for business leadership in this as well. It's where we work our way around, what regulation looks like, what works, what doesn't around the globe, and for certain sectors. So, all of what Hiba said.
It sounds like you're extending your message for a good practice of look ahead, don't wait, don't be the laggard, but come out in front of whatever the standards are, even globally. Is there anything that the audience might not be aware of on a global scale? You mentioned that there might be a decade ahead in some areas. Anything that you would like to mention that you see coming or that you think is a best practice globally that maybe here we don't talk about as much?
Gosh, the first thing that comes to mind is carbon pricing. I can't think of a more efficient and effective way to drive decarbonization, and places like the EU have had it for a while now. We're having these CBAM discussions, which is a border adjustment. So for those of you sending products, into the EU that have a carbon profile, you'll be subjected to this. Supposedly into this, next year they're going to finalize some rules. And so, when I start to think about that, I start thinking and wanted to share that, hey, look, if you guys aren't already planning for that, make sure somebody within your company is aware of these cross-border transactions will be subject to some of these tariff-like measures on the carbon side. So that's something that comes to mind. I think harmonization of standards is still an issue that's outstanding. We talk about things in different ways across borders. We talk about emissions profile. We talk about how we do things at plants here in the U.S. versus how we do things at plants in Asia and or the EU. You might have very different inputs, very different profiled energy heating. So if I use natural gas here in the U.S., it's produced better and cleaner than it may be in another jurisdiction. So all these things have to be rolled into data, and I think harmonizing that data and being able to talk across borders will be an important step towards this, again, global lower carbon economy.
It's a great message. Have anything you're
Something,
seeing?
yeah, something I would add too is there's an increase in disclosure requirements. So there's an increase in, I talked about very briefly the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. There was a voluntary framework for companies to start disclosing their financial risks related to climate. And now there are a few geographies, a few countries that are adopting the framework of the TCFD as a required reporting. And so that's really changing how companies are looking at climate-related risks internally, especially within their financial teams. And so, you know, we're going to have to report. Obviously, there's the proposed rule from the SEC on climate, and so we're seeing that in the United States. But TCFD is already being adopted overseas, and so we already have to look at climate-related risks and opportunities that you brought up right at the beginning. So what are those opportunities that we can harness out of those risks, and how is that going to drive us to, you know, 2030, 2040, 2050 and beyond? And so we're looking at, you know, we are doing scenario analysis on climate across our company. So it's really driving companies to look at climate in a very different way from this belongs to the corporate sustainability or functional sustainability team. This belongs to finance. This belongs to accounting. This belongs to the business unit. So really spreading that wealth around.
That's great. So tell me, both of you have been very positive, obviously very successful with what you do, but what about the challenges? What are you seeing as the challenges in your role, the obstacles in your future? Let's talk a little bit about the things that are roadblocks for you.
You know, I would say data. Data is a big roadblock for us, whether it's access to or integrity of data and what you're getting. You know, we rely on some verification bodies for our suppliers to understand whether their data integrity is fairly high, but verification in itself and some of the processes behind verification aren't always the ones that you can count on. You look at process verification, but where are you actually getting those numbers and what are driving those? So that's one of our biggest challenges, especially as we look to how we're going to reduce from that baseline, right, going forward. The other challenges, I think, generally are related to investment by leadership. So, you know, sustainability and decarbonization, those are big topics for us at HPE. But we also are up against other risks. You know, in the last 2 years, we've had supply chain shortages. We've needed to get our product to market. And so sustainability can sometimes start to just click down those rungs of the ladder a little bit and not necessarily get the leadership view that you want them to get and the visibility that you want sustainability topics to get, especially decarbonization. So, you know, making sure that that's always at the forefront of those conversations with leadership and showing the actual business value that decarbonization is bringing. You talked about customers, competitive advantage, and customer demand. That's a huge driver for us. And so, you know, those are some of the challenges that we're looking at right now, and then bringing those customers and suppliers along with us as we kind of tackle those challenges.
It brings me some comfort that you didn't say semiconductors. How about on the Dow on the manufacturing side, chemicals? Tell me about your challenges.
Yeah, well, since we're in D.C. and since I do government affairs, I'm going to cheat here and say it's the patchwork of, you know, regulatory schemes across not only the globe but here nationally. You know, how to harmonize that, how to make investment decisions based on jurisdictions that may be driving you faster towards decarbonization. And I think those are all, you know, factors that have to go into our decision making. And you know, it sure would be nice if we could get on the same page across jurisdictions and borders and be talking about things to address in a consolidated and very clear way. And I still find that challenging, even from jurisdictions here on this continent and others. So I think that's what I'm going to highlight.
Is that the advocacy piece of your role, where you're informing and pushing for some standards and common?
Yeah, I'll cheat more on that too. Yes, I will highlight government affairs things. Yes. So.
Well, let's end on a positive note, not about our challenges and our roadblocks, but tell me what inspires you. Tell me what's been rewarding for you, the good parts of your journey, or the journey to come, something you're looking forward to.
You know, I'll say some of the companies in this room will agree as well, and the investment that has been added to climate tech. So Hicks, you mentioned carbon capture, sequestration, and storage, but direct air capture, technology, engineered solutions to remove carbon from the atmosphere. I spent a week, a couple weeks ago, kind of listening to some of the startups and their aspirations going forward to create scalable technologies that are durable, where you're storing carbon upwards of 1,000 years. I love that we have now a carbon reduction and carbon removal pillar, of the First Movers Coalition under the US Department of State. And so it's really encouraging to see the amount of investment that is being infused into that startup industry. And just the people who I've talked to who are so passionate about decarbonization, and even internally seeing our employees come up with their innovative solutions. We have executive compensation tied to our climate reduction targets. And so again, back to, this is not a sustainability team problem. This is a company problem. This is a global problem. And so that inspires me. That makes me wake up and have hope in the morning, because there are a lot of challenges in what we do. Don't get me wrong, in all of the light that I've shared here. And so, I'm really encouraged by that.
So it's not just Salesforce futurists that have that positivity. It's small businesses, it's decarbonization teams.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you, Hicks? What brings you joy in all of this?
It's technology for sure. I mean, there's so much disruption out there that's going to happen, and it's just amazing. And a couple of things that I'd like to highlight for the group that we have going on. We have a cool partnership with Waste Management to really build out this recycling ecosystem. We don't have the best recycling rates here in the U.S., so there's a lot of room and opportunity there. Waste Management is doing some really cool things to expand what you can put in that blue box. And so I think, as that accelerates and gets out there further into neighborhoods, there will be some really cool things that come from what we considered, valueless waste, not only a decade or two ago. The other thing for me, and selfishly again, going back to what I handle as far as my government affairs role, is technology around small modular nuclear. I'm telling you, look, there's some really cool stuff out there. We've partnered with a group called X-Energy. If you're an energy-intensive, industrial manufacturer, there's a way to reduce your profile out there, and it's coming within the next decade. We've committed to putting the technology on a yet-to-be-determined site of ours in the Gulf of Mexico area. And you're talking about taking your carbon emissions footprint to darn near zero. Small modular nuclear is going to be awesome. And it's not only going to be for single sites, it'll be for clusters of industrials. And I think there's some really cool things to come in that space. And so that keeps me coming back to work.
I liked at the very beginning when you were telling us about your goals, you mentioned the packaging and recycling and all of that, and then you tied it in at the end with how that excites you with the technology to come in that area. So that bodes well for the future.
We hope so.
Well, I'd like to thank my very knowledgeable panel, Hiba and Hicks. Thanks for joining us today and informing everyone about your decarbonization efforts and successes. And we appreciate everything you've brought to us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for